Hello, welcome to Roadway Visualizer. George here. In the last video we quickly made a camera system so we could move around our scene. In this video we're going to finally draw the rest of the lanes that we have. If we take a quick look at our streaming assets folder, hopefully you remember we have a lanes file. Here it's going to open in Excel. It's a comma separated value file. And we have three lanes we're dealing with. The left lane, the center lane, and the right lane. And of course the X, Y, and Z data for each of those. In a previous video, we already went ahead and created our parser. So if we go over to Road Parser, load that on up, Parser did all the hard work of bringing that data in, converting it over to floating point values, as well as taking the cross product of those values and determining offsets. Those are our lane boundaries. What we need to visualize here are three lanes. Those are the center lines of the lanes. And then of course the lane boundaries between them, 1 through 4. So that's going to be a total of 7 objects we need to visualize. Those are each going to be 7 separate meshes. The reason for this is technically you could create your program so that you could turn certain lanes off if you weren't interested in them. And I want to leave them as separate game objects to have that power. I also want to make sure I can assign different materials to these objects very easily. And I want to just have them set up as simple game objects so that in my hierarchy things look simple and are quite easy to use. We already have a script called Road Generator, and that's where we're going to begin. Although we're going to have to make a few quick tweaks to what we did before. So previously, the Road Generator simply created our user data based on the user parser. We also have our road parser waiting right here for us to work with. We had made it so that the object this is attached to gets a mesh filter and a mesh renderer. And of course, that's where our user data gets attached to. In this case, though, I don't want to have all these mesh filters and mesh renders all floating around the place on this object. I'm going to create a new game object first that's going to hold all those lanes. Because if you remember, we've got 7 of those lanes to deal with. So let's create the parent for all this information. Let's do a protected game object. We'll just call it lanes. In awake, we'll go ahead and generate that object. Lanes is going to be equal to a new game object. Now here we have generate. Now generate is a very generic term for what we were doing. Specifically, we were generating the user data or user lane. So let's go ahead and put user lane right here and change this function name to user lane. Now we're going to create a separate function. Let's call it void generate lanes, just to differentiate it. I just don't want to mix the code between these two areas. Go ahead and copy that function, paste it in start as well so that our lanes will get generated. Now within awake, we go ahead and create an instance of our user and road parsers. And then down here inside of start, we call these individual files. Whoops, misspelled that. Within generate user data, we call the method to parse that file, and we're going to copy that just as before. So we're going to copy that line, paste it in here, but instead of the user parser, of course, we're using the road parser. And because we kept the same method names across both files, everything works just fine. Our application.streaming asset path is where we're holding these files. So if we go back over to Unity, take a look at our streaming assets folder. The reason I'm doing this is because when we build this project out, I will actually have a streaming assets folder that anyone can put data in there, and they'll be able to, through a GUI that we'll make in the following video, put whatever path name they want to and be able to load in new interesting data beyond this test information we're using here. Now we need to get the name right, and that's going to be lanes. Now Unity masks the extension of files, so you might want to right click in your project and show and explore, and then take a look at the actual file and make sure you have the right name here. So lanes.csv, F2 to rename, Control A to grab all, and then Control C to copy all that information over. Bring it on up here, paste that name in right here. Now don't forget that / right there to show you you're in a new directory, the next directory. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now assuming our road parser works properly, we should have loaded all that data and information into our Unity script. Now we just need to start working through that information. So the first thing we're going to need to do is actually create a separate game object for each of these lanes. Now we had a total of 7 lanes, so that makes 7 game objects. So let's go ahead and start with that. So we'll do a, semicolon on the end, please. Yes. So let's do a game object. GM is going to be equal to a new game object. Perfect. Now what we need to do is parent this new game object to the lane information. We want all the lanes to be parented to that lane object just to make everything nice and easy. We do parenting, of course, to the transform object. So if we do gm.transform.parent is going to be equal to lanes.transform. Now we need to generate the mesh filter and the mesh render that get attached to this object. By default, new game objects don't have any components other than that simple transform. So let's do mesh filter mf is equal to gm.add component type mesh filter. And let's do mesh renderer mr is going to be equal to gm.add component mesh renderer. We're grabbing a reference to the mesh render so we can actually assign it its own separate material. I want the boundaries to all have the same color, but I want those center lines to be differentiated through a color, maybe like RGB or something. So let's go ahead and create some public materials that we're going to bring into this file. Let's do public material. We're going to need, let's see, 1 for all 4 of the boundary lanes and then 3 more materials for the rest of them. So let's do public material boundaries, and then we'll do a public material center line. Let's do center line, what's it? Let's just call it center line. Let's copy that 2 more times, 2, 3, and we'll do, of course, left and right center line materials. Let's go ahead and jump back into Unity really quick and create those materials. I don't have a folder already to hold materials. I have that one that came in from my FBX, but I don't like to use that. So let's go create folder material. Jump in here, create, and let's create some materials. We're going to call this one center CL. Let's do create a couple more materials real fast. And of course, left center line and right center line, and create another material and call this one, let's call it lane boundary. Lane boundaries I'm going to make white color. Let's make the center line, let's see, so it's going to start from the left, so let's make that one red. Center will be green, and the final lane will be blue, keeping with RGB equals XYZ. Now our script, so long as we don't have any errors, let's take a look really quick, clear it out. It's good. Should now have all of our public materials we can attach. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's do our lane boundaries to boundaries, center line, left center line, and right center line. Okay, so we've got all of our materials set up. So that way, now what we can do is when we're generating this stuff, over here in generate lanes, we can associate the mesh render with the proper material. So mr.material is equal to, let's see, which one are we working with yet? Let's do the center line. So we'll do center line, or center line. Actually, let's do left center line as our first one we'll work with. So mesh render.material is going to be equal to left center line. Easy as that. Now we're going to need to generate the mesh that's going to be attached to the mesh filter holding all of the information. Luckily, we did most of the dirty work already inside of the road parser. If we go over to the roadparser.cs file, we of course have vector lists of all the 3-dimensional points. And because we're dealing with lines or line strips, that's all we really need. We will need one more thing, and we'll get to that in a second. That has to do with the indices telling you how to connect the dots of this structure. But one second. Let's first create a new mesh. Let's call it temp mesh. It's going to be equal to a new mesh object. Ugh. Now temp mesh is going to need assigned to its vertices, and it's also going to need temp mesh dot set indices. Now the set indices function we'll get to in a moment. Let's first set our vertices. Because this is the center lane, we can just grab the public value, which is a list of vector3 objects of center lane. So let's do road parser dot left lane dot to array. We need to, of course, convert that over to a simple array of information, not a list for Unity to work with. Now we need to populate the indices, and we kind of did something dumb in a couple videos ago. This generate user data, we ended up creating a function inside of user parser called get indices. Now this function is so generic, all it does is literally iterate over the length of an object and create a 0 to, length minus 1 array telling you how to connect them all in sequence. Now this isn't the only way to do it. You could have used some built-in stuff with enumerations in C#, but I like to do it this way just because it's very clear, and once it's a function you really don't have to worry about anything. But having this function in this user parser section really doesn't make sense. This has nothing to do really with parsing data at all. I should be putting this function inside of the road generator because it really does have to do with generating the geometry. So I'm going to copy this function really quick, come back in here, and paste it in. Now we're going to need to make some changes to how this works. I want to pass in the array of information that I am working with. Let's call it vertices. And all I'm doing here is connecting them one after the other. I'm not doing any kind of special mesh ordering and so forth and so on. It's just literally going from the start all the way to the end. So we're just counting from 0 to 1 minus the end of it. So here we create a new integer array that's going to hold all those values. It's going to tell you which vertices to use to construct this object. But I want to use the vertices dot length. And in here I want to iterate over temp.length. Of course we iterate now through each member of temp, and then it gets the next incremental value, and we return that object. Get indices. So let's copy get indices. Scroll on up. Here under set indices, the first thing we need to do is pass it that index list. Let's use get indices. And we want to pass into that the temp mesh dot vertices. That's our list of vertexes. Or vertices, excuse me. Next up, we pass in the mesh topology. That is how the mesh is structured and how the dots should be connected, so to speak. We'll do line strip. And the final thing is our submesh, which we're ignoring in this lesson. It's just going to set it to 0. And that's it for this object. Now we just need to do this for the center lane and the right lane. And that just requires changing a few little tiny things. So let's do a Control-C, Control-V, and instead of this being left now, this is going to be the center line. That wasn't confusing enough. And because these objects have already been generated, we don't need to redeclare them. So let's get rid of the declarations here. There we are. And the material needs to be adjusted. So instead of the left center line, this is going to be the center line material. And right here, instead of being the left lane, this should now be the center lane. It looks like the rest of that's all fine. And now we can just copy that. Paste it again. And now we're in the right center line. Make a few quick changes. Once again, the material right center line is first. And then we need to do right lane next. Save this. And let's go ahead and test it and see what's going to happen. Come on down in here. Go to our console. Make sure we did save that script, of course. Let's see. MF is assigned but is never used. That's the problem right there. I did miss something. So I never assign the mesh itself to the mesh filter. So let's make sure we do that really quick. We're going to do it 3 times. We're going to do it at the end. So let's do mf.mesh is equal to temp mesh. Copy that. Do it again right at the end of the center lane. And then once again at the right lane. Let's go ahead and hit run. See what happens. There we are. There's our lanes. Now you'll notice we've got this sort of weird shimmering color going on. I believe this is going to have to do with the fact that I don't have normals associated with this object. So one way of dealing with that, getting around it, is to go into our materials and under emission, pump that up to whatever color the object is. So I'll make it that green. Let's go to right. Let's make this the nice blue. And of course left. Let's make this that nice old red color. There we go. And there we are. Now we can clearly see those lanes. And I probably want to do the same thing for the user's information too. It's not looking too good. So I believe I was bad with that. And where did I put that material for the user? There it is. Let's throw that under materials now. And there we are. Now we can clearly see all of these lines. Ooh, wow, it looks like the person made a big mistake right there. Next up, we need the boundaries, right? So the boundaries are going to happen right after this center line. So let's go ahead, and it's going to be very similar It's going to be very similar. Let's go ahead and copy this center line. Now the boundaries are actually composed of several objects, right? 4 objects. So we're going to need to do this 4 times as well. But we're going to use, for the material, the boundaries material. We're going to generate a new mesh, of course. Under here in vertices, we're going to want to grab the boundaries information. So let's do dot boundary, lane boundary 1. And of course, now we're going to do this boundaries. Let's put a label B1 above it. B2, B3, B4. B4, B3, B2. Now we just change each one. So MR boundaries, boundary material is correct. We just want to make sure instead of lane 1 boundary, it's lane 2, 3, and 4. Save that. Now one thing we're not doing here is actually creating names for these objects, and that can come and bite us in the butt later on. Let's stop running this application, check our console, make sure it's all good, and hit the run button to see if our lanes are generated. And there we go, you can actually see all of our lanes right there. Perfect. Although it looks like our boundaries need their emission cranked up as well. There we are. Very easy to see everything that's going on now in this scene. Now I had mentioned nothing has a name, and it's very hard to differentiate these when everything is just a new game object. So let's give these objects some names. Let's do gm.name is going to be equal to the string left center line. Let's copy and paste that a few times for each of these objects, changing their names accordingly. Center line, right center line, and so forth. Come down to the boundaries now, do the same thing. Just going to do B1, B2, and B3, and B4, I think, for this one. Make it real easy. Save. Come back over here, reset the game. Open up new object, which I need to change as well, but at least all of these objects now have associated names. Let's go ahead and fix that last name really quick, which is the main lanes object. So we'll do lanes.name is equal to lanes. Save it, turn it off, turn it back on. Come on. There we are. And there's our lane object. Perfect. In the next video, we're going to take a look at the GUI, and now we can let another user put in their own lane and simulation data so that this can be reused over and over and over again. Remember, if you enjoy this series, like and subscribe. Please remember to comment below if you have any suggestions or ideas for different things you'd like me to show in the future. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.